My entire life, I was raised to be a sacrifice. In my family, the wealthy and powerful Ashworths of coastal Maine, there's a dark and horrifying tradition used to select an heir and cast out the unworthy child. I was the unworthy one. My father, a classic narcissist, and my golden child sister spent years gaslighting and tormenting me, preparing me for my eventual ruin. When I got engaged, my father gave me an ultimatum that was designed to be my final humiliation. He thought I was still the broken, helpless girl he'd created. He was wrong. I discovered the truth about our most horrifying family tradition, a secret so dark it was meant to be buried forever. This isn't just a revenge story. It's a story about breaking a generational curse. This is how I took a centuries-old legacy of cruelty and burned it to the ground. If you enjoyed this video or found it helpful, go ahead and give it a like. It really helps me out. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks a bunch! The air in my father's study always smelled the same: old paper, lemon polish, and the faint metallic scent of disappointment. It was the smell of my childhood. I was 27, a grown woman with a mortgage on a small condo in Boston and a fiancé I adored. But the moment I stepped across the threshold of that room in our family home in Port Blossom, Maine, I was 12 years old again. Small, powerless, and braced for impact. "Clara, sit," my father, Alistair Ashworth, said without looking up from the leather-bound ledger on his desk. He didn't use a computer for what he considered important work. Computers were ephemeral. A ledger, its pages heavy with the ink of generations, was permanent. Like our family, like our traditions. I sat in one of the two stiff-backed chairs that faced his desk, the ones reserved for business associates or children in need of correction. My hands were clammy. I was only here because I'd made the mistake of believing things could change. I was here to officially ask him to walk me down the aisle. My fiancé, Liam, a good kind man with a soul as open and clear as a summer sky, had insisted. "He's your father, Clara. You should give him the chance." Liam didn't understand. He came from a normal family, a chaotic, loving clan of loud talkers and easy huggers. He couldn't comprehend the intricate architecture of cruelty that was the Ashworth dynasty. Finally, Alistair closed the ledger with a soft, definitive thud. He steepled his long, elegant fingers and fixed his pale blue eyes on me. It was like being examined by a scientist. "You were getting married," he stated, as if confirming a mildly interesting but ultimately trivial fact. "Ice in September, to Liam. I've met him. He seems adequate," he said, the word a small, deliberate cut. "It will be a significant event. A union of families. The Ashworth name will be on every invitation." My heart sank. I knew where this was going. It was never about me, my happiness, or my love for Liam. It was about the name, the legacy. "Which brings me to the matter of your sister," he continued, his tone smooth as polished stone. "Isobel will, of course, be your maid of honor." I felt the air leave my lungs. "No," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh no, Dad, she won't be." His eyes narrowed. It was a subtle shift, but it was the sign of a storm gathering off the coast. "That wasn't a request. It is a matter of propriety. She is your only sister, the heir to this family. For her not to stand beside you would be a public declaration of a rift. It would be an embarrassment." "An embarrassment?" I found my voice, a new, sharp anger cutting through the old fear. "After what she did? After what you both did? You think I care about being an embarrassment?" Isobel, my sister, the golden child, the chosen one. She was everything I wasn't: ruthless, charming, and a perfect mirror of our father's cold ambition. 2 years older, she had spent our entire lives reinforcing my status as the family's designated failure. The last time I had seen her was 3 years ago, on the day she systematically destroyed my chance at a life free from them. I had won a prestigious fellowship to study architectural preservation in Italy, my one true passion, my ticket out. It was a full ride, a dream I had painstakingly built for myself, brick by brick. The night before I was supposed to leave, Isobel, with a saccharine smile, told me she had helped by sending the fellowship committee a supplementary letter of recommendation. A letter she had forged, purportedly from one of my professors, detailing my history of emotional instability and a difficulty with authority. She'd framed it as a misguided attempt to show my resilience. In reality, it was a character assassination. The fellowship was rescinded the next morning. When I confronted her, my world shattered. She didn't even deny it. Someone has to stay and take care of this family, Clara, she'd said, examining her perfect nails. And it's not going to be me. You're just not built for the world out there. You're too sensitive. When I ran to our father, sobbing, hysterical, he listened to my story with that same detached calm. He looked at Isabel, then back at me. Clara, he said, and this was the moment that broke me. And your sister was only trying to help. You have always been prone to dramatics. Perhaps this is for the best. You need to learn to control your emotions. He didn't just excuse her, he used her sabotage as proof of my inherent flaw. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. My pain wasn't real, it was a symptom of my own weakness. Her cruelty was a misguided act of love. I was the crazy one. I packed a bag that night and left. I didn't speak to either of them for almost 2 years. Now, sitting in this cold, silent room, he wanted me to put her in my wedding. Isabel will be your maid of honor, he repeated, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. Or I will not attend. I will not walk you down the aisle. And you will consider our relationship, and your place in this family, permanently severed. There it was, the ultimatum, but it was more than that. In our family there were rules. Unspoken, ancient, and terrifying. This wasn't just a threat. This was the invocation of the tradition. He was threatening me with the culling. Ever since we were children, Isabel and I were raised in a quiet, brutal competition. The culling was the culmination of that contest. It was a tradition passed down through generations of Ashworths. On a significant family occasion, a 25th birthday, a marriage, a death, the patriarch would officially designate one child as the heir and the other as the cull. The heir would inherit everything. The fortune, the properties, the name. The cull would be cast out, given a token sum of money, and erased from the family history. Their portraits would be removed from the walls. Their names would be struck from the family ledger. They would cease to exist. I was always being groomed for the culling. Every mistake I made was a mark against my name in Alistair's mental ledger. Every success of Isabel's was a point in her favor. My passion for art and history, frivolous. Isabel's cutthroat performance on the junior equestrian circuit, a sign of her strength. When I fell and broke my arm at age 10, my father's first words were, "How could you be so clumsy?" An Ashworth is always in control of their body. When Isabel was caught cheating on a history final, he'd paid the school a handsome donation and praised her ingenuity. My entire life had been an exercise in learned helplessness. I had tried so hard to be what he wanted, to win a scrap of his approval. But every attempt was futile. I was Sisyphus, and the boulder was his disappointment. The cognitive dissonance was a constant torment. This man who was supposed to love me was the architect of my misery. For years, I resolved this conflict by believing that I was the problem. If I could just be better, smarter, stronger, less sensitive, then he would love me. But leaving home had changed me. In Boston, I had built a life on my own terms. I had found a job. I had found Liam, and I had found a therapist who gave me words for the psychological prison I'd grown up in. Words like narcissism, gaslighting, and trauma bond. I was slowly, painfully, building boundaries, brick by brick, just like I'd once tried to build my dream. Alistair was looking at me now, expecting me to crumble. He expected tears, pleading. He expected me to fold, just as I had always folded. I stood up. The legs of the chair scraped against the hardwood floor, a sound of protest in the suffocating silence. "It's not coming," I said. The surprise on his face was real. It was a flicker, quickly masked, but I saw it. I had deviated from the script. "Don't be a fool, Clara," he hissed. "Oh, and so no idea what you were throwing away." "No," I said, and my voice didn't shake. "I know exactly what I'm walking away from, and I know what I'm walking toward." I turned and walked out of the room, out of the house, and didn't look back. I got in my car and drove the 2 hours back to Boston, the coastline of Maine a blur of gray rock and churning sea beside me. I felt a terrifying, exhilarating lightness. I had spent my entire life walking on a tightrope, terrified of falling. I just realized I could fly. When I got back to my apartment, Liam was waiting. He took one look at my face and wrapped me in his arms. "It didn't go well," he stated softly. "He gave me an ultimatum," I said into his shoulder. "Isabel is maid of honor, or he's not coming. He's cutting me off." "The culling." Liam held me tighter. "Then we don't need him. We'll get your Uncle Michael to walk you down the aisle. Or we'll walk down together. Clara, we'll do whatever you want. This is our day, not his." not his. But as I stood there wrapped in the safety of his love, a new idea began to form. A cold, hard, defiant idea. My father wanted to use my wedding as the final stage for my humiliation, the public confirmation of my status as the call. He wanted to erase me. What if I used it to erase him instead? Oh, I said, pulling back to look at him, I have a better idea. We're not changing a thing. In fact, we're moving the venue. Liam looked confused. To where? To Port Blossom, I said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across my face. We're getting married in his backyard. I'm going to throw the biggest, most beautiful party this town has ever seen, and he's not invited. I'm going to celebrate my new life on the ashes of my old one. And there was one person I knew I had to invite. One person who might understand, my great-aunt Genevieve. Alistair's aunt, my grandfather's sister. She was the original family pariah. She had been culled 60 years ago and lived in a small cottage on the other side of the state. I hadn't seen her since I was a child, but my mother had always spoken of her with a strange, sad reverence. It was time for a family reunion. The next few months were a whirlwind of defiant planning. I booked the most beautiful venue in Port Blossom, a historic seaside estate with rolling lawns that bordered my father's property. The symbolism was not subtle. I sent out the invitations, thick cream cardstock with elegant gold script, to everyone in my father's social and business circle. I knew he was getting calls. I knew the whispers were starting. Why isn't the wedding at Blackwood Manor? Why is Alistair's daughter getting married next door? He tried to retaliate. He called the venue owner, a man he played golf with, and tried to pressure him into canceling my booking. But I had been smart. I had paid the entire fee up front and signed an ironclad contract, a trick I'd learned from watching my father's own ruthless business dealings. The owner, more loyal to a check than to a friend, politely refused him. Isabel sent me a single venomous text message. You have no idea the war you just started. Dad is going to ruin you. I didn't reply. I just screenshotted it and saved it to a folder on my computer labeled, Fuel. The one person I was nervous to contact was Great Aunt Genevieve. I found her number through my mother's old address book. When I called, her voice was reedy, but sharp as a tack. Clara Ashworth, she said after I introduced myself. I was wondering when you might call. You have your mother's courage. I've been reading about your upcoming nuptials in the local paper's society pages. Causing quite a stir, aren't you? I'd like to invite you to the wedding, Aunt Genevieve, I said. I feel like there are things about this family I don't understand. Things about my mother. There was a long pause. And your mother was a good woman in a den of vipers, she said, her voice softening. Alistair broke her spirit. But she never stopped fighting, not in her own way. Yes, child, I will be there. There are things you deserve to know. My father had painted her as a tragic, fragile creature, too weak for this world. He'd barely seemed to mourn. He'd redecorated her bedroom suite within a month. At the time, I was too lost in my own grief to see the strangeness of it. Now, Genevieve's words planted a seed of doubt. She never stopped fighting. What had my mother been fighting against? The wedding day arrived, a perfect, brilliant September afternoon. The sky was a searing blue, the air crisp with the first hint of autumn. Our venue was breathtaking. Flowers cascaded from every surface, a string quartet played softly on the lawn, and the ocean glittered in the distance. Beyond a line of ancient stone walls, I could see the slate-gray roof of Blackwood Manor, silent and brooding. I stood in the bridal suite, looking at my reflection. I didn't see the scared small girl anymore. I saw a woman who had walked through fire and hadn't been burned. Liam came in, looking impossibly handsome in his tux. You ready to do this? He asked, his eyes shining. Well, more than ready, I said. My Uncle Michael, my mother's brother, a kind, gentle man my father had always disdained, walked me down the aisle. As I walked, I saw the faces of the guests. My father's entire world was here. His business partners, his political allies, the old money families of Port Blossom. They all had expressions of polite, veiled curiosity. They were here for the drama as much as the ceremony. And in the third row I saw her. A tiny, bird-like woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and a ramrod-straight spine. Great Aunt Genevieve. She gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. The ceremony was beautiful. Liam and I exchanged our vows, words we had written ourselves, promises of a future built on trust and kindness. a world away from the secrets and lies of my past. As he slid the ring onto my finger, I felt a profound sense of peace. I had won. I had built my own happiness in the shadow of their hate, but the day wasn't over. The real ceremony, the one I had been planning for months, was about to begin. At the reception, after the dinner and the toasts from the wedding party, I stood up, tapping my glass for attention. A hush fell over the tent. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice clear and steady. "It means the world to Liam and me to be surrounded by so much love on our wedding day. There's one more person who'd like to say a few words. Someone who has traveled a long way to be here, and who knew this family long before many of us were born. My great-aunt, Genevieve Ashworth." A murmur went through the crowd as Genevieve made her way to the microphone. She looked small and frail, but her presence was commanding. She stood at the podium for a moment, her sharp eyes scanning the faces of the guests, many of whom were the children and grandchildren of people she had known 60 years ago. "Thank you, Clara," she began, her voice surprisingly strong. "It is an honor to be here, to see my grandniece, the daughter of the brave Eleanor Ashworth, find such happiness." She paused, letting the name of my mother hang in the air. "Many of you look at the Ashworth family and you see a legacy. You see power, wealth, and tradition. I am here to talk about one of those traditions." The air in the tent grew thick with tension. This was not a typical wedding toast. "In this family," Genevieve continued, her voice ringing with a cold fury, "into a tradition known as the culling. A quaint, medieval term for a rather barbaric practice. A practice where one child is chosen and the other is cast out. I was the first cull of my generation. I was cast out by my own brother, Clara's grandfather, for the crime of falling in love with a man he deemed unsuitable. I was disinherited and erased." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the stunned guests. "You all think this tradition is about maintaining the purity of the bloodline, about ensuring a strong heir. That is the story you have been told. That is the lie. I am here today to tell you the truth." She reached into her handbag and pulled out a small, worn leather journal. "This was my father's journal. My brother thought he had destroyed all of them, but I saved one." My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I glanced at Liam. He was staring at Genevieve, his expression a mixture of shock and awe. "The Ashworth fortune," Genevieve said, her voice dropping, forcing the crowd to lean in, "was not built on timber and shipping, as the official history states. It was built on betrayal. During the Second World War, my father, a man lauded as a patriot, used his shipping company to smuggle stolen art and assets for Nazi sympathizers, hiding their wealth in exchange for a hefty cut. He was a war profiteer, a traitor." A collective gasp went through the tent. People were looking at each other, their faces pale with shock. Conlin Genevieve's voice rose, filled with 60 years of repressed rage. Was not a tradition of inheritance. It was a legal mechanism. A fail-safe. It was invented by my father to create a scapegoat. From birth, the culled child's name was quietly attached to shell corporations, to offshore accounts, to every dirty deed the family committed. They were being groomed, unknowingly, to be the legal fall guy. If the family's crimes were ever discovered, the patriarch could point to the estranged, disinherited, unstable child and say, "It was them." And the cull was designed to take the fall. To go to prison to protect the heir. My blood ran cold. I wasn't just being groomed for social exile, I was being groomed for a federal indictment. My fellowship sabotaged, the constant narrative of my instability. It wasn't just cruelty. It was the construction of a plausible narrative for my eventual downfall. "My nephew, Alistair," Genevieve said, her eyes burning with contempt, "is a more monstrous man than his father ever was, because he knew what this tradition was really for, and he embraced it. He chose to perpetuate it." Odd. But his wife, Clara's mother, Eleanor, she found out. She opened the journal. Eleanor was smart. She started digging into the family finances, trying to understand the husband she had married, and she found the truth. She found the truth. She found this journal. She confronted Alistair. She told him she was going to go to the authorities, that she would not allow her daughter, Clara, to be raised as a sacrificial lamb. Genevieve looked directly at me, her eyes filled with a profound sorrow. 3 weeks later, your mother was dead. It was not cancer that killed her, Clara. It was a rare, fast-acting poison, administered over several weeks, easily mistaken for a sudden illness by a compliant family doctor. Alistair murdered his wife to protect his secret. The world tilted on its axis. A wave of nausea and a dizzying, blinding rage washed over me. I gripped Liam's hand, my knuckles white. The air was thick with horror. The guests were frozen, their faces masks of disbelief. "And I've kept this secret for 60 years, Genevieve finished, her voice shaking with the weight of it all. "Out of fear, out of shame. But I will not let him do to Eleanor's daughter what my family did to me. I have already sent copies of this journal, along with corroborating financial documents I have collected over the years, to the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI." She closed the journal with a snap that echoed like a gunshot in the silent tent. "The culling is over," she declared. "And the House of Ashworth has fallen." Then she looked at me, a real trembling smile on her lips. "Congratulations on your wedding, my dear. May your life be everything they tried to deny you." She stepped down from the podium, and then chaos erupted. The immediate aftermath of Genevieve's speech was a blur of surreal, disjointed moments. It was like a bomb had gone off, and we were all just standing in the silent, ringing aftermath, covered in the dust of a demolished dynasty. The guests didn't flee. They were frozen, whispering in horrified, excited huddles. The story was too big, too monstrous to walk away from. This wasn't just gossip, it was the public execution of a great American name. My wedding had become the most exclusive true crime podcast recording in the country. I saw a man I recognized as my father's chief legal counsel discreetly slip out of the tent, his face ashen, furiously typing on his phone. Others, my father's closest business allies, were avoiding eye contact with anyone, suddenly fascinated by the patterns on their dinner plates. The social fabric of Port Blossom was tearing apart at the seams, right here on this manicured lawn. Liam, my rock, my anchor in this hurricane, wrapped his arm around me. "Are you okay?" he whispered, his voice laced with shock. "No," I answered honestly, "but I will be." A strange clarity was cutting through the nausea and the grief. It was the feeling of a massive weight, a weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying, being lifted off my soul. My mother hadn't been weak. She hadn't been a fragile victim. She had been a warrior. She had fought for me, and she had died for me. My father hadn't just neglected me. My father hadn't just neglected me. He had been trying to build my cage from the day I was born, and my mother had died trying to tear it down. Great Aunt Genevieve was immediately surrounded by a small group of older women, my mother's distant relatives, and a few old family friends who had been pushed to the margins by Alistair over the years. They were holding her hand, weeping, a small circle of vindicated ghosts. My Uncle Michael, my mother's brother, came over to me, his face pale and his eyes red. "Clara, I never knew. I never knew." "My God, Eleanor." He couldn't finish, just pulled me into a fierce hug. "I am so sorry." The first siren started in the distance about 20 minutes later. It seemed impossibly fast, but Genevieve had been precise. She told me she had a lawyer on standby who sent the digital files to the authorities the moment she took the podium. They weren't coming for us. They were heading for the great slate-roofed house on the other side of the stone wall. Some of the guests, emboldened now, started moving toward the edge of the property, craning their necks to see the flashing blue and red lights painting the twilight sky over Blackwood Manor. It was a better spectacle than fireworks. Liam led me away from the chaos, into the quiet of the bridal suite. He sat me down and knelt in front of me, taking my shaking hands in his. "You've just been through the unimaginable," he said, his voice soft. "Whatever you need. If you want to leave, we leave. If you want to stay, we stay. If you want to scream, scream." I looked at him, my husband of 3 hours, and a wave of overwhelming love washed over me. He was my safe harbor. "I want to stay," I said, a new resolve hardening in my voice. "I want to watch it burn." We didn't go back out to the party. We just sat there, listening to the muted sounds of the music that had, against all odds, started up again. A defiant, festive soundtrack to the downfall of a king. My phone started vibrating incessantly. Texts and missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. From cousins who hadn't spoken to me in years. From Isabel. I ignored them all. Later that evening, 2 plainclothes detectives found us. They were respectful, almost gentle. "Mrs. Sterling?" the older one asked, using my new married name. It sounded like a shield. "We're sorry to interrupt your evening. We just have a few questions if you're up to it." I nodded. We sat with them for over an hour, with Liam and Genevieve by my side. I told them everything. The gaslighting, the fellowship's sabotage, the constant narrative of my instability. It all slotted perfectly into the framework Genevieve had provided. I wasn't just a grieving daughter, I was the star witness to a decades-long conspiracy to create a patsy. Genevieve's journal provided the history. My life was the proof of its modern-day application. They told us Alistair had been taken into custody without incident. He had been sitting in his study, in the dark, as if waiting for them. Isobel, they said, had been hysterical, screaming that it was all my fault, that I was a liar who had poisoned the family. She wasn't arrested, not yet, but she was named as a person of interest. Her future as the heir was now a future as a co-conspirator. The wedding night wasn't what we planned. There was no romantic send-off. We stayed at the venue, in the bridal suite, the world outside buzzing with the news. Liam held me all night as I cycled through waves of grief, rage, and a strange, liberating relief. I was mourning a mother I was only just getting to know, and a father who had never existed at all. The next morning, the story was everywhere. National news. International. American industrialist family's dark secret exposed at wedding. Heiress accuses father of murder, treason, and they used pictures from my wedding photographer, who was about to become very famous. There were photos of me smiling, of Genevieve at the podium, and long lens shots of police cars swarming Blackwood Manor. The legal battle that followed was a leviathan, but for me, the fight was over. The U.S. Prime Attorney's office built their case on the foundations Genevieve had laid. The financial crimes were a labyrinth of shell corporations and hidden ledgers, with my name sprinkled throughout like poison. But the intent was clear. Alistair's lawyers tried to argue that Genevieve was a senile, vengeful old woman, and that I was an unreliable, emotionally disturbed daughter. But the evidence was too strong. The narrative of my instability, which my father had so carefully constructed, now worked against him. It was seen by the prosecution for what it was: a calculated, long-term strategy of psychological abuse designed to discredit a future witness. My therapy records, which I willingly provided, documented the years of gaslighting and emotional manipulation, corroborating my story. My therapist became an expert witness on the effects of narcissistic abuse. Isabel's text message, "You have no idea the war you just started. Dad is going to ruin you," was presented as evidence of a threat. Her life unraveled. The high-powered finance job my father had secured for her fired her. Her society friends abandoned her. Stripped of her father's power and protection, she was just a cruel, empty person with a bad reputation. Last I heard, she was facing her own charges related to financial complicity, and was trying to sell her designer handbags online to pay for her lawyers. She tried to pin the blame on my father, claiming she was just another victim of his control, but her long history of active, willing cruelty toward me undermined her defense. Alistair Ashworth was never tried for my mother's murder. The burden of proof after so many years was too high. But the financial case was airtight. He was found guilty of racketeering, massive fraud, and tax evasion stretching back 50 years. The war profiteering part, while morally damning, was past the statute of limitations, but it painted a picture of his character that left the jury with no doubt. He was sentenced to life in a federal prison, where he would have no legacy, no power, and no name worth speaking. The Ashworth fortune was seized, the properties liquidated to pay off decades of back taxes and fines. Blackwood Manor, the Gothic stage of our family's tragedy, was sold at a government auction to a hotel developer who planned to turn it into a luxury spa, erasing the last vestiges of my family's reign. About 6 months after the wedding, I met Genevieve for lunch. She looked 10 years younger. The weight of her secret, a burden she had carried for 60 years, was gone. "And you know," she said, sipping her tea, "our mother saved all of your artwork. Every drawing, every clay pot you made as a child. Alistair wanted to throw them out, called them clutter, but she hid them in a trunk in the attic. She told me once, this is the real Ashworth legacy, not the money, the creativity, the light." Tears welled in my eyes. It was another piece of my mother given back to me. A mother who saw me, who valued the very things my father tried to crush. "She would be so proud of you, Clara," Genevieve said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "You didn't just save yourself. On nature memory. Lilium and I are still in Boston. We live a quiet life." I left my corporate job and went back to school, finally pursuing my degree in architectural preservation, with a scholarship I earned all on my own. I started a small nonprofit on the side, funded by a modest inheritance from Genevieve, that helps restore historical buildings in underserved communities. I am building things, not tearing them down. Sometimes when the ocean wind blows a certain way, I think I can smell the salt and pine of port blossom. I think of that big empty house on the cliff. I don't feel anger anymore. I don't feel sadness. I just feel peace. The culling was a tradition designed to create a sacrifice to feed the family's darkness. But my father and his ancestors made a fatal miscalculation. They forgot that sometimes the sacrifice refuses to be slain. Sometimes the sacrifice picks up a sword and burns the whole rotten temple to the ground. They wanted to erase me. Instead, I gave them what they deserved. I let the truth be their legacy.